Hi there, folks. In this tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at how to use the transpose system in Zbrush to pose our character. Before we take a look at how the transpose system works, I want to first talk about referencing the pose that you want to create. And I would recommend looking at classical sculpture as well as photographic reference to find a pose that sells your character in the best possible way. And secondly, I would find myself a free skeleton online and I would pose that first. And the reason for doing this is to help you understand how the human body works, particularly if you're new to ZBrush and you're new to posing in general. And it just ensures that you get everything in the right place and all the rotations are humanly possible. The transpose system in ZBrush relies heavily on masking and a plugin called Transpose Master to allow us to manipulate multiple pieces of geometry at one time. But let's take a look at how this works on one object. So I'm going to open up my folder here. I'm going to hide all the clothing elements of this model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit W on my keyboard, and that's going to bring up my gizmo. And this is something that if you're new to ZBrush, you will be more familiar with. But prior to this being introduced, the only option we had for manipulating subtools was something called the Transpose Line. And we can access this if we go up to this icon, and you'll see that the gizmo disappears and I now have this line. We can also tap the Y key to toggle this on and off. Now, if I go ahead and click and drag, I can actually orientate this transpose line down a particular limb of my character. So let's use the arm as an example here. And I'm using the outer orange circles to position it so that I can align it as needed. And then if I switch over to the rotate function here, in order for this to actually rotate my object, I'm going to click on the inside of one of the orange circles. It's very hard to see, and this is a very tricky system to use, but once you're used to it, it's very powerful. So if I click on the inside of this orange circle, you'll notice that I start to rotate from the pivot point at the top. So we'll undo that. So just to show you that again, I'm going to move this out of the way. So by clicking and dragging, I create a pivot at the top and a controller at the bottom. And with rotate enabled, I can now rotate my object around this pivot. But that's not a lot of use to us when we're posing a character. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the control key, go into the masking options and choose mask lasso. I'm going to mask out the area of the arm, hold control and click in an empty area of the canvas to invert my mask. And then while holding down control, if I click on the surface of my model, I can soften and blur out the mask to create a softer fall off. Now, if we repeat the procedure with our transpose line, we have our pivot up here at the shoulder and our controller down by the wrist. I can start to rotate it and it only rotates the arm. Now, what you're going to see here is some strange behavior around the shoulder area. That's completely normal. You may have to readjust the pivot again by selecting that outer orange circle and adjusting that until you get a desired rotation that you're looking for. But it's also worth mentioning that with the transpose system, it's never going to give you a perfect deformation. You will have to switch over to something like the move brush and manually fix the object. There is another function that we can use with the transpose line. If I decide to first mask out the forearm here, and I can draw my transpose line from the elbow to the wrist. So what this allows me to do is I can now obviously rotate from the elbow. If I hold down the Alt key and click on the inside of the bottom one, I can actually rotate the character's wrist. All right. And this is an alternate function to the transpose line. It allows you to have two pivot points. So I can bend it at the elbow and I can then also very easily bend it at the wrist as well. Now, if we step back until we're back to our character's A pose, and let's bring back our clothing options. If I repeat my transpose option on the arm here, and I just rotate, you'll see that it's only moving the character body. The rest of the clothing isn't following along with it. And that's just to do with how ZBrush functions. We're working on individual subtools instead of one continuous mesh. Now, what you could do is merge down all of your meshes, but that's rarely going to be the preferred option. So instead, we can actually use the Transpose Master plugin found up here in Z plugin, Transpose Master. And if we hit the T-pose mesh button, what ZBrush will do is it will temporarily combine our entire model. We can then go in and repeat the same process. We can mask out the area that we want to pose, grab our transpose line, and now, as I rotate the arm down, you'll see that it includes the character's body as well as the clothing. And then once we're happy with it, we just go to Z plugin, T-pose to sub T, and this will now copy all of that information over to the individual subtools in our folder. Now that we've covered the basics of how the transpose system works, we're now going to take a look at a more practical example using the skeleton and statue reference that we looked at earlier. We're now back in our standard mode inside of ZBrush, and we have our completed pose. So if we go ahead and compare that to our reference, we have our skeleton obviously on this side, but this is the scan that we were referencing. You can see that we're quite close, but we still have a few areas that we need to adjust. Now, obviously the proportions are not exact between the two models, so there's going to be differences. But one of the main things to remember with transpose is that it's not a perfect system, and you are going to have to do some additional sculpting and additional adjustments once you come out of that mode. So there we go, folks. That's a quick look at posing our characters using the transpose system inside of ZBrush. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll speak to you in the next video.